Sandra Blake stepped off the transport shuttle and into the gleaming halls of Celestial Haven. The luxury orbital station floated in space like a jewel, its crystal walls showing the stars beyond. Everything here cost more money than most people. Made in a year. Sandra had saved for 3 years just to afford 1 week at this place. She carried a simple travel bag over her shoulder. Her clothes were clean but old. A gray jacket covered the scars on her arms. Her boots had walked on dozens of worlds, and they showed it. She looked like any other tired traveler, not like someone who belonged in the most expensive hotel inn. The solar system. The lobby stretched out before her like a small city. Marble floors reflected lights from crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Rich people in expensive clothes walked around talking in quiet voices. Alien guests with colorful skin and strange shapes moved between the humans. Everyone here had money, power, or both. Sandra walked to the front desk. Her reflection in the polished surface showed a woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. She had been pretty once, before the wars. Now she just looked worn down by life. Behind the desk stood Lisa Grant. Lisa was young and beautiful, with perfect hair and a dress that cost more than Sandra's entire wardrobe. She had worked at Celestial Haven for 2 years, always trying to impress the rich guests. Lisa believed that money made people important, and poor people were just lazy. "Can I help you?" Lisa asked, but her tone said she did not want to help at all. "I have a reservation," Sandra said quietly. Sandra Blake. Lisa looked at her computer screen, then back at Sandra. Her eyes moved from Sandra's old jacket to her worn boots. "Are you sure you have the right place? This is Celestial Haven, not the budget station." Sandra felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice calm. "Yes, I'm sure. Room 2847. I'll need to see some identification and proof of payment." Lisa said loudly. Other people in the lobby began to notice. "We've had problems with people trying to sneak in here." An alien couple with blue skin and 4 arms stopped to watch. They whispered to each other in their own language, but Sandra could tell they were laughing. Near the elevators, a group of rich humans in silk clothes turned to stare. "Here's my ID," Sandra said, placing her card on the desk. Lisa picked it up like it might be dirty. She scanned it with her reader, and her eyebrows went up. "This says you're from the outer colonies. How does someone from the outer colonies afford a place like this?" "I saved my money," Sandra said. "Right," Lisa said with a nasty smile. "And what do you do for work? Are you a maid? A factory worker?" More people gathered around now. Sandra felt their eyes on her like weights. She had faced alien armies without feeling this small. In space battles, she knew who the enemy was. Here, she was surrounded by her own people, and they were all looking at her like she was dirt. "I'm retired now," Sandra said. "Retired from what?" Lisa pressed. "Let me guess. You worked in a mine? Or maybe you cleaned toilets on cargo ships." A man in an expensive suit laughed. "Probably never been off her home planet before," he said. To his wife, "Look at those clothes." Sandra's hand started to shake, but not from fear. She had killed to protect these people. She had lost friends so they could live in safety. She had given everything for humanity, and now they treated her like garbage. "Ma'am, if you could just show me your credit account," Lisa said. "I need to make sure you can actually pay for this room. Sometimes people book rooms they can't afford, and then we have to call security." The word security made everyone pay attention. An alien with green scales and big teeth moved closer to get a better look. 2 human women in jewelry that sparkled like stars whispered behind their hands. Sandra opened her account on her personal device. She had exactly enough money for 1 week here and not a credit more. But it was her money, earned with blood and sacrifice. Lisa looked at the number and her face changed. The amount was enough, but just barely. Well, I suppose that's sufficient, she said like she was doing Sandra a favor. But I'll need to see some references. People who can speak for your character. References? Sandra asked. Yes, we need to know you're the right sort of person for Celestial Haven. We have very important guests here. Senators, business leaders, alien ambassadors. We can't have just anyone walking around. Sandra looked around the lobby. All these people with their fine clothes and perfect smiles. None of them had ever held a plasma rifle while aliens tried to kill them. None of them had stayed awake for days keeping enemy ships away from human colonies. None of them had friends buried on distant worlds. I don't have references, Sandra said. Well then, this is a problem, Lisa said. How do we know you're not? Some kind of criminal? Or maybe you're here to steal from our other guests. The blue-skinned aliens moved even closer. One of them said something that sounded like laughter. The human man in the expensive suit shook his head like he was disappointed in Sandra. Please, Sandra said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. I just want to check into my room. I'm sorry, but I can't allow someone like you to stay here without proper references, Lisa said. Maybe you should try the budget station. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you there. Sandra felt something break inside her chest. She had faced down alien warships. She had held the line when everyone else ran. She had saved entire worlds from invasion. But here, in this pretty lobby full of pretty people, she felt like nothing. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metal case. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were her military medals and her service record. Battle ribbons from 12 different worlds. Citations for bravery. A medal for saving the colonies at Proxima Station. Will these work as references? Sandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked at the medals like they were toys. Military service? Well, I suppose that's something. But these are very old. What have you done lately? Sandra closed the case. She had given her whole life to the military. She had given her youth, her health, her friends, everything. And now this young woman looked at her sacrifice like it meant nothing. Across the lobby, someone else had been watching the whole time. He stood in the shadows near the bar, a tall man with dark hair and kind eyes. He knew exactly who Sandra Bullock was and what she had done for humanity. His name was Keanu Stone, and he was about to change everything. Keanu Stone had been sitting at the bar for 20 minutes, waiting for his meeting with the Galactic Council representatives. He sipped his drink slowly and watched the rich people walk around the lobby. Most of them bored him. They talked about money and parties while real heroes went unnoticed. When Sandra Bullock walked into the lobby, Keanu almost dropped his glass. He knew that face. He had seen it in his nightmares for 15 years. But in his dreams, Sandra was always young and strong, standing on the bridge of her starship, while enemy fire lit up the space around them. The woman at the front desk looked older now. Her hair was gray and her shoulders were bent. The years had been hard on her. But Keanu would know Sandra Bullock anywhere. She was the reason he was still alive. He watched Lisa Grant treat Sandra like dirt, and his blood started to boil. These people had no idea who they were looking at. They saw an old woman in cheap clothes. Keanu saw the person who had saved his life and the lives of millions of others. 15 years ago, Keanu had been a young diplomat on his first big mission. The human colony on New Geneva was under attack by the Krex Empire. The aliens wanted to wipe out every human on the planet. Keanu and 50 other diplomats were trapped in the capital city with no way to escape. The rescue ships were too far away. The planet's defenses were broken. Everyone thought they were going to die. Then Sandra Bullock arrived with her small fleet of military ships. She was just a captain then, not even an admiral. Her ships were old, and her crew was tired from months of fighting. The smart thing would have been to wait for backup. The safe thing would have been to retreat and come back with more ships. But Sandra Bullock never did the smart or safe thing. When people needed help, she took her little fleet straight into the teeth of the Crex Armada. Keanu remembered watching the battle from the ground. Sandra's ship, the Earth's Pride, led the charge. The Crex had 20 ships to her 5, but Sandra fought like she had 100. She used every trick she knew, every bit of skill she had learned in a lifetime of war. She lost 3 of her ships that day. Good people died to save the diplomats on New Geneva. But Sandra never gave up. She kept fighting until the Crex broke and ran. Then she landed her remaining ships and personally led the ground forces that cleared the aliens out of the city. When Keanu met her after the battle, Sandra was covered in blood and smoke. Her uniform was torn and her face was black with soot. She looked like she had been through hell, which she had. But when Keanu tried to thank her, she just shook her head. "Don't thank me," she had said. "Thank the ones who didn't make it home." That was Sandra Bullock. She saved lives and took no credit. She fought battles that others were afraid to fight. She gave everything and asked for nothing back. And now she was being treated like garbage by people who owed her their freedom. Keanu watched Lisa make Sandra show her identification. He saw the crowd gather around to stare and whisper. He felt sick watching his own species act this way. These people lived in safety because Sandra Bullock and others like her had fought for them. But they had forgotten. They thought their comfortable lives just happened by accident. When Lisa demanded references, Keanu almost stood up. But something made him wait. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted to see what Sandra would do and what the crowd would do. Sandra pulled out her metal case with shaking hands. Keanu knew what was in there. He had read her service record many times over the years. The Battle of Proxima Station, the defense of the Outer Rim, the New Geneva Rescue. Medal after medal for bravery under fire. But Lisa looked at those medals like they were nothing. Just old pieces of metal from a time she did not understand. She had probably never been in danger in her whole life. She had never seen what war really looked like or what it cost. Keanu saw other things too. He saw the rich humans in the lobby turn away when Sandra needed help. He saw them whisper and laugh instead of standing up for her. These were the people Sandra had risked her life to protect, and they would not even speak for her when she needed them. The alien guests were even worse. The blue-skinned couple from Centauri Prime pointed at Sandra and made jokes in their own language. Keanu understood enough of their words to know they were calling her a pathetic human and wondering why humans were so poor and dirty. Those same aliens owed their lives to human soldiers. The Centauri system had been saved from invasion by human fleets. But they acted like humans were beneath them now that the war was over. Near the elevators, Keanu spotted Ambassador Vex from the Crex Empire. The same empire that had tried to destroy New Geneva. Vex watched Sandra's humiliation with what looked like pleasure. The Crex had lost their war against humanity, but they still hated humans. Seeing a human hero brought low probably made Vex very happy. Keanu felt anger building in his chest like a fire. This was wrong on every level. Sandra Bullock was a legend among people who knew real history. She should have been treated like royalty anywhere humans gathered. Instead, she was being made to beg for a hotel room while aliens laughed at her. But Keanu was not just angry, he was also thinking. He had not become one of humanity's top diplomats by acting on emotion. He had learned to plan, to think 3 steps ahead, to turn bad situations into good ones. As he watched Sandra close her metal case with tears in her eyes, Keanu made a decision. He was not going to just help Sandra. He was going to teach everyone in this lobby a lesson they would never forget. He was going to remind them what humanity was really about. Keanu pulled out his personal communicator and started making calls. The first call went to Admiral Jack Hayes, the military commander of Celestial Haven. The second went to Captain Ben Ross of the 5th Fleet. who was attending the same conference as Keanu. The third went to Colonel Amy Chun, who was supposed to meet Keanu for dinner. "I need a favor," Keanu said into each call. "And I need it right now." Within 5 minutes, Keanu had reached 12 different people. Some were military officers. Some were diplomats. Some were business leaders who knew the truth about the wars. All of them owed their lives or their careers to heroes like Sandra Bullock. "There's someone here who needs to be honored," Keanu told each of them. "Someone who has been forgotten by people who should remember. Can you come to the main lobby? And bring anyone else you can find who served in the Centauri Wars or the Outer Rim Defense." As Keanu made his calls, he kept watching Sandra. She stood at the front desk like a statue, taking every insult with quiet dignity. She could have fought back. She could have told these people who she really was. But that was not Sandra's way. She had always let her actions speak louder than her words. Well, Keanu thought sometimes actions needed a little help. He finished his last call and stood up from the bar. It was time to remind everyone in Celestial Haven what a real hero looked like. Lisa Grant was enjoying herself. She loved putting people in their place, especially people who thought they belonged somewhere they did not. This old woman with her cheap clothes and worn-out medals was exactly the kind of person who made Celestial Haven look bad. "I'm sorry, but military service from years ago is not really a reference," Lisa said with a fake smile. "We need current references. People who can speak to your character now, not what you did in some old war that nobody remembers." Sandra closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they looked very tired. "I understand," she said quietly. "Maybe I should just go." "That would probably be best," Lisa said. "I'm sure there are other places that would be more suitable for someone like you." The crowd around the desk was getting bigger. People loved watching someone else get embarrassed. It made them feel better about themselves. The blue-skinned aliens were recording everything on their devices, probably to show their friends later. Ambassador Vex from the Krex Empire pushed through the crowd to get a better look. His red eyes glowed with pleasure as he watched the human woman suffer. "How amusing," he said in his rough voice. "Humans treating their own kind like dirt. No wonder you people are so easy to defeat." Some of the human guests looked uncomfortable when Vex said that, but none of them spoke up. They were too afraid of causing trouble with an important alien ambassador. Sandra picked up her travel bag and started to turn away from the desk. She had given up. After all the battles she had won, all the impossible odds she had faced, she was defeated by a hotel clerk and a crowd of cowards. That was when the elevator doors opened. Admiral Jack Hayes stepped out first. He was a big man with gray hair and a chest full of medals on his dress uniform. Everyone in the lobby knew who was. He commanded all human military forces in the solar system. Behind him came Captain Ben Ross, a hero of the Fifth Fleet, then Colonel Amy Chun, who had fought in the Outer Rim Wars. More elevators opened. Officers in dress uniforms began filling the lobby. Some were young, some were old. All of them wore the decorations of people who had seen real combat. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who had faced death and lived to tell about it. Lisa looked confused. "What's happening?" she asked her supervisor, who had just arrived at the front desk. "I don't know," the supervisor said. "Some kind of military gathering, I think." The alien guests started to look nervous. Ambassador Vex stepped back from the front desk, his red eyes darting around the room. The blue-skinned couple stopped recording and put their devices away. Something was happening that they did not understand. More people kept arriving. Not just military officers now, but civilians too. Business leaders who had served in the reserves. Politicians who had fought in the wars before going into government. Even some of the hotel staff, men and women who had once worn uniforms before taking jobs in the service industry. They all walked toward the front desk with purpose. Some of them Sandra recognized from her years of service. Others were strangers. But they all had one thing in common. They all knew what real sacrifice looked like. Lieutenant Commander Steve Park was the first to reach Sandra. He had served under her command during the Battle of Titan. "Captain Blake," he said, and his voice carried across the whole lobby. "It's an honor to see you again, ma'am." Sandra looked up at him with surprise. "Steve, what are you doing here?" "I'm stationed here now, ma'am. Security detail for the diplomatic conferences." He looked around at the crowd of rich people staring at them. "I heard someone was giving you trouble." More officers joined them. Major Lisa Santos, who had been Sandra's communications officer. Commander Rick Taylor, who had lost his arm in the Battle of Europa. Each one greeted Sandra with respect and warmth. They called her Captain and Ma'am and thanked her for things she had done years ago. The crowd of rich guests started to back away. They could see that something important was happening, something they did not understand. The officers were treating this old woman like she was somebody special. But how could that be? She was just a poor person in cheap clothes. Lisa Grant watched all this with growing alarm. Military officers did not gather like this for no reason. And they certainly did not show this much respect to random hotel guests. "Excuse me," she said. To Commander Park, "Is there some kind of problem?" Park looked at her like she was an insect. "No problem at all," he said. "We're just paying our respects to Captain Sandra Blake, one of the greatest heroes in human history." "Heroes?" Lisa laughed nervously. "She's just some old woman trying to check into a hotel room." "Just some old woman?" Major Santos stepped forward. She was a small woman, but her voice was hard as steel. "Do you know who you're talking about?" "No, she doesn't have proper references," Lisa said, but her voice was getting smaller. "References?" Commander Taylor held up his artificial arm. "She's the reason I'm still alive. She's the reason any of us are still alive." More officers kept arriving. The lobby was filling up with people in uniform. They formed a loose circle around Sandra, not threatening anyone, but making it clear that she was under their protection. Colonel Amy Chun pushed through the crowd. She was a legend herself, known throughout the fleet for her courage under fire. When she saw Sandra, her usually stern face broke into a smile. "Sandra Blake," she said warmly. "The woman who saved the colonies." "Amy," Sandra said, and for the first time since arriving at the hotel, she smiled back. "I thought you were still out on the rim. I was until last week. Heard you were retiring. About time you got some rest." The rich guests were whispering frantically among themselves now. Save the colonies? Greatest heroes in human history? This could not be the same woman they had been laughing at just minutes before. Ambassador Vex tried to slip away through the crowd, but Captain Ross blocked his path. "Going somewhere, Ambassador?" Ross asked politely. "I thought you'd want to meet Captain Blake. She's the one who broke your blockade at New Geneva." Vex's red eyes went wide. Every Crex in the galaxy knew that name. Sandra Blake was the human who had defeated their best admiral and saved thousands of human lives. She was famous among the Crex as the one who could not be beaten. "That's impossible," Vex said. "Sandra Blake is a legend. She would not be dressed like that." "Like what?" Colonel Chun asked, her voice dangerous. "Like a person who doesn't need to show off her wealth? Like someone who spent her money on other people instead of fancy clothes?" The blue-skinned aliens were trying to leave too, but they found their way blocked by more officers. They had been laughing at Sandra just minutes before. Now they looked like they wanted to disappear. Sandra looked around at all the familiar faces, at all the people who had come to stand with her. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears now. Not tears of shame, but tears of gratitude. "You didn't have to do this," she said to Colonel Chun. "Yes, we did," Chun replied. "We never got to thank you properly before. You always disappeared before we could have the ceremony. Lisa Grant stood behind her desk, her mouth hanging open. She was starting to understand that she had made a terrible mistake. But she had no idea how terrible it really was, because across the lobby, near the bar where he had been sitting all this time, Keanu Stone was finally standing up. And he was walking toward the front desk with a look on his face that made everyone step out of his way. Keanu Stone walked across the lobby like he owned the place. In a way, he did. As one of humanity's most important diplomats, his word could open doors anywhere in the galaxy. People moved out of his way without thinking about it. There was something about the way he moved that commanded respect. The military officers saw him coming and stepped aside to make room. They knew who he was. Keanu Stone had negotiated peace treaties that saved millions of lives. He had prevented wars before they started. He was the kind of man who could talk alien emperors into changing their minds. But right now, he only cared about one person. Captain Sandra Bullock, Keanu said, and his voice carried across the entire lobby. Everyone stopped talking. Everyone stopped moving. The only sound was the hum of the space station's engines. Sandra looked up at him with surprise. She had aged since their last meeting, but Keanu would know her anywhere. "Do I know you?" she asked. "You saved my life 15 years ago," Keanu said. "New Geneva. You probably don't remember me. I was just one of 50 diplomats trapped in the capital city when the Kreks attacked." Sandra's eyes went wide. She did remember. "The young man with the scared eyes," she said softly. "You were so worried about the other diplomats." "I thought we were all going to die," Keanu said. "The Kreks had us surrounded. Their ships controlled the space around the planet. No one was coming to help us. And then you showed up with your little fleet and took on their entire armada." The lobby was dead silent now. Even the alien guests had stopped trying to leave. This was history being told by people who had lived it. "You were outnumbered 4-1, Keanu continued. "Any sane commander would have waited for backup, but you didn't wait. You couldn't wait, because people were dying on the ground." Ambassador Vex tried to speak up. "The Kreks forces at New Geneva were not that large," he said, but his voice shook. Keanu turned to look at him. "Were you there, Ambassador?" "Because I was. I watched from the governor's mansion as Captain Blake's ship, the Earth's Pride, led the charge against your fleet. I saw her lose 3 ships and keep fighting. I saw her break your blockade and save every human on that planet." The other diplomats in the lobby were starting to whisper. New Geneva was famous throughout the galaxy. It was the battle that broke the Kreks Empire's expansion. It was the moment when the smaller human fleet proved they could beat anyone. "Captain Blake," called out a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see Ambassador Thax from the Centauri Republic, pushing through the people. His blue skin was darker than the other Centaurians, and his 4 arms were decorated with honor scars. "Ambassador Thax," Sandra said with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I came for the peace conference," Thax said. "But I did not expect to see the defender of Proxima Station." He bowed low, all 4 arms crossed over his chest. "My people owe you a debt that can never be repaid." The other blue-skinned aliens in the lobby looked shocked. They had been laughing at Sandra just minutes before. Now one of their most important leaders was bowing to her. "You were at Proxima?" asked one of them. "She was more than at Proxima," Thax said. "She saved our entire system. The Void Hunters had destroyed our fleet. They were moving to devour our home worlds. Captain Blake arrived with her task force and held the line for 6 days while we evacuated our people." More alien voices joined in. A tall, thin creature with silver skin stepped forward. "Are you saying this is the human who defeated the Void Hunters?" It asked in a voice like wind chimes. "The same," Thax confirmed. "She lost half her ships, but she never retreated. She gave us time to escape with our children." The silver-skinned alien bowed as well. "The ethereal collective remembers." Our poets still sing songs of the human captain who fought the darkness. Ambassador Vex was backing away now, trying to reach the exit. But Captain Ross was still blocking his path. "Ambassador," Ross said politely, "aren't you going to thank Captain Blake for showing mercy to your people?" "Mercy?" Vex's red eyes flickered. "At the Battle of Kepler Prime," Sandra said quietly, "your fleet was broken. Your ships were crippled. I could have destroyed them all, but I let your people go home instead." Vex stared at her. Every Krex knew the story of Kepler Prime. It was the battle that ended their war with humanity. Admiral Corex had led their greatest fleet against the human colonies, and a single human captain had defeated them all. But instead of finishing them off, she had let them retreat with honor. "You could have ended the Krex Empire that day," Vex said slowly. "I'm not in the business of ending civilizations," Sandra replied. "I just wanted the fighting to stop." More aliens were recognizing her now. The word spread through the lobby like fire. Sandra Blake, the human shield. The defender of the rim, the captain who would not yield. She had a dozen names in a dozen languages, and all of them meant the same thing: hero. A group of insect-like creatures with 6 legs and crystal wings gathered around Sandra. Their leader spoke in a buzzing voice. "The Hive Collective honors the one who saved our breeding worlds from the plague ships. And the Stellar Federation remembers the one who opened the safe routes through the dark nebula, added a floating creature made of pure energy. The Stone Lords of Titan acknowledge the one who stood against the machine swarm, rumbled a being made of living rock. One by one, alien after alien came forward to pay their respects. Sandra had touched their lives, saved their worlds, or protected their people. She was famous throughout the galaxy, and she had never known it. Lisa Grant stood behind her desk, her face white as paper. She finally understood what she had done. She had humiliated one of the most respected beings in the galaxy. She had treated a living legend like garbage in front of dozens of witnesses. I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," said Colonel Chun. "You saw an older woman in simple clothes and decided she was nobody important. You never asked who she was or what she had done. You just assumed." The rich human guests were looking at each other in shame. They had watched Sandra being humiliated and done nothing. Some of them had even laughed. Now they realized they had been in the presence of greatness and failed to recognize it. "Captain Blake," said a familiar voice. Sandra turned to see Admiral Hayes pushing through the crowd. He was the commander of Celestial Haven, and his face was red with anger. "Admiral," Sandra said, "I'm sorry for the trouble." "You're sorry?" Hayes said. "Ma'am, I'm the one who should be sorry. One of our staff has treated you with disrespect that shamas our entire facility." He turned to Lisa with fury in his eyes. "You're fired. Security will escort you off the station within the hour." "But Admiral," Lisa started to say. "No," Hayes cut her off. "What you did here today is unforgivable. Captain Blake is a hero to every human in the fleet. She's a hero to half the alien species in the galaxy. And you treated her like dirt because she wasn't wearing expensive clothes." Keanu stepped forward. "Admiral, if I may suggest something?" "Of course, Ambassador Stone. I think this incident should be recorded and shared. Not to punish anyone, but to remind people what real heroism looks like. Too many of us have forgotten the sacrifices that bought our freedom." Sandra shook her head. "That's not necessary. I just want to check into my room and rest." "With respect." "Captain," Keanu said, "this is bigger than just you now. People need to remember. The galaxy needs to remember what humans can be at their best." The crowd was growing as news of the incident spread throughout the station. Reporters were arriving with cameras. Diplomats were calling their governments. The story was already spreading beyond Celestial Haven to the rest of human space. Ambassador Thax raised all 4 of his arms. "I will tell my people what I have seen here today. How a human hero was shamed by her own kind, and how other humans stood up to defend her honor. "And I will tell the ethereal collective," added the silver-skinned alien. "This will be remembered in our memory crystals for 1,000 years." Sandra looked around at all the faces surrounding her. Aliens who had traveled across the galaxy to pay their respects. Military officers who had dropped everything to stand with her. Even some of the rich guests were coming forward now to apologize for their silence. For the first time in years, Sandra Bullock felt like her sacrifices had been worth something. She had given her life to protect others, and finally, people remembered. Within hours, the story had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The reporters who had gathered in the lobby transmitted the recordings to every major news network in human space. The video of Sandra being humiliated, followed by the gathering of officers and aliens, played on screens from Earth to the outer colonies. But it was not just human networks that picked up the story. The Centauri Republic broadcast it with commentary from Ambassador Thax himself. The ethereal collective shared it through their memory crystals, letting billions of their people experience the emotions of the moment. Even the Krex Empire, despite their usual hatred of humans, could not ignore a story about Sandra Bullock. Keanu sat in his quarters aboard Celestial Haven, watching the news reports come in. He had used his diplomatic contacts to make sure the story reached the right people. But even he was surprised by how quickly it had spread and how strongly people were reacting. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets when they learned what had happened. Veterans marched to government buildings, demanding that Sandra Bullock be given the honor she deserved. The president himself appeared on television to apologize for how a human hero had been treated. "Sandra Bullock represents the best of humanity," the president said to cameras. "She gave everything to protect our way of life, and we failed to protect her dignity. This cannot happen again." The outer colonies were even more angry. These were the worlds that Sandra had saved during the wars. Their people remembered the battles, remembered watching her ships appear in their skies when all hope seemed lost. Protesters surrounded luxury hotels and demanded that staff be trained to recognize military veterans. On Mars, the colonial governor declared Sandra Bullock Day and announced that a statue would be built in her honor. The Jupiter colonies named their newest city after her. Even the mining stations in the asteroid belt, places where people had little time for ceremonies, stopped work for a moment of silence in Sandra's name. But it was the alien reactions that surprised everyone the most. Species that had never spoken publicly about the human wars began sharing their own stories of Sandra Bullock. The Void Hunters, who rarely communicated with other species, sent a message through space that simply said, "The small ship captain earned our respect." The Stellar Federation released ancient recordings of Sandra's battle against the machine swarm. The robots had been consuming entire star systems, turning planets into factories for their endless war. Sandra had led a desperate attack on their Central Command ship, knowing that she probably would not survive. The recording showed her ship, badly damaged and bleeding atmosphere, ramming into the heart of the machine fleet. "She saved 3 billion lives that day," the Federation spokesman explained to reporters. "We had given up hope. Our fleets were broken, our worlds were falling. And then this one human appeared and changed everything." The Stone Lords of Titan, who spoke only once every 100 years, broke their silence to honor Sandra. "She stood when others fell," they rumbled through their stone voices. "She gave when others took. She is worthy of the eternal songs." Back on Celestial Haven, Sandra found herself trapped in her hotel room by reporters and well-wishers. She had finally been given the most expensive suite on the station, but she could not enjoy it. Every time she tried to leave, crowds of people wanted to talk to her, thank her, or just touch her hand. "I don't understand why this is such a big deal," she told Keanu when he came to visit. "I was just doing my job." Keanu sat down across from her, looking out at the stars through the suite's huge windows. "That's exactly why it is a big deal," he said. "You saved entire worlds and thought you were just doing your job. You never asked for thanks or medals or parades. You just did what needed to be done and then went home. But everyone is acting like I'm some kind of saint, Sandra said. I made mistakes. I lost ships and people died under my command. I'm not perfect. No one expects you to be perfect, Keanu replied. They just want to remember what it looks like when someone chooses to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Outside Sandra's window, shuttles were arriving at the station every few minutes. Diplomats from dozens of worlds were coming to pay their respects. Military officers who had served under Sandra's command were traveling from across the galaxy just to see her again. Even alien leaders who had never visited human space before were making the journey. The hotel staff treated Sandra like royalty now. The same manager who had watched her humiliation without speaking up now personally brought her meals and apologized every few minutes. The other guests, the rich humans who had laughed at her, either avoided her completely or came to her suite to beg for forgiveness. But Sandra received everyone with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. She forgave the manager and the guests. She thanked the aliens who came to honor her. She listened to the stories of soldiers who had served under her command and remembered their names and faces. Lisa Grant had been removed from the station, but the story followed her wherever she went. Every news report mentioned her by name as the receptionist who had humiliated a galactic hero. No other hotel would hire her. Her friends stopped talking to her. She had become the most hated person in human space. She tried to give interviews to explain herself, but no one wanted to hear her excuses. She said she was sorry, that she had not known who Sandra was, that she was just doing her job. But people remembered the video of her sneering at Sandra's medals and calling military service worthless. She represents everything wrong with our society, one commentator said on the news. We've become so focused on wealth and status that we've forgotten who our real heroes are. The incident became more than just a news story. It became a symbol of how humanity had changed since the wars ended. During the fighting, everyone had known who the heroes were. People hung pictures of military officers in their homes and named their children after famous captains. But as the years passed and peace settled over the galaxy, people began to forget. The wealthy classes started to think that money made them important. They looked down on veterans and working people. They bought expensive things to show their status and forgot that their safety had been bought with blood. But Sandra's humiliation reminded everyone of what really mattered. Across human space, people began to change how they treated veterans. Hotels started offering free rooms to former military officers. Restaurants gave discounts to anyone who had served. Children learned about the wars in school again. The alien species watching all this were amazed. Most civilizations honored their warriors while they were fighting, then forgot them when peace came. But humans were different. When they realized they had forgotten their heroes, they worked to remember them again. This is why humans are so dangerous, Ambassador Vex said in a private report to the Krex government. They can change their entire society in a matter of days. They can go from forgetting their heroes to worshiping them overnight. No other species does this. The ethereal collective had a different view. Humans have the capacity for both great cruelty and great kindness, their philosophers observed. They can humiliate their heroes, but they can also recognize their mistakes and try to fix them. This is not weakness. This is strength. 3 days after the incident, Keanu received a message that made him smile. The Galactic Council had voted to award Sandra Bullock the Cross of Universal Peace, the highest honor that could be given to any being in the galaxy. She would be only the third human ever to receive it. When Keanu told Sandra about the award, she just shook her head. "I don't need any more medals," she said. "It's not about what you need," Keanu replied. "It's about what the galaxy needs. They need to see that heroism is real, that good people still exist, That someone can sacrifice everything for others and ask for nothing in return. Sandra looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, on 1,000 different worlds, people were talking about her story. Children were learning her name. Young officers were studying her battles. Her example was inspiring a new generation. To choose service over selfishness. Maybe, she thought, that was worth more than any medal. 6 months later, Sandra Bullock stood on the observation deck of her small home on Luna Colony. She watched the Earth turn slowly below, its blue oceans and white clouds unchanged by all the chaos her story had caused. The medal ceremony at the Galactic Council had been 3 months ago, but reporters still called her every day asking for interviews. She had turned them all down. Sandra had said everything she wanted to say in her acceptance speech. She had thanked the people who served, honored the ones who died, and asked everyone to remember that freedom was not free. Then she had gone home to her quiet house and tried to return to her normal life, but normal was different now. Children sent her drawings of her battles. Veterans visited to thank her for speaking up for them. Young officers asked for her advice about leadership and sacrifice. Sandra tried to help them all, but sometimes she felt tired from all the attention. Any regrets? Asked Keanu. He had come to visit her for lunch, as he did every few weeks when his diplomatic work brought him to Earth space. About what happened at the hotel. Sandra thought for a moment. No, if my embarrassment helped people remember what matters, then it was worth it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a cargo ship rise from Earth's surface toward the Luna. Shipyards. Sandra knew that ship was probably carrying supplies to the outer colonies, the same colony she had fought to protect years ago. The trade routes were safe now because of the peace she had helped win. The changes are real, you know, Keanu said. It's not just talk on the news. Hotels all over human space have new policies about treating veterans. The military academies are getting more applications than they've had in 20 years. Young people want to serve again, Sandra nodded. She had seen the reports. Military recruitment was up in every human territory. More importantly, the quality of recruits was better. People were joining because they wanted to protect others, not just for steady pay and benefits. And it's not just humans, Keanu continued. The alien species are watching us. They're amazed that we could change our whole society so quickly. The Centauri Republic has started honoring their own veterans for the first time in decades. Even the Krex Empire is treating their warriors better. The real change, Sandra knew, was deeper than new policies and ceremonies. Human society was remembering what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. The incident at Celestial Haven had become known throughout the galaxy as the reminder, and its lessons were spreading far beyond the hotel lobby where it began. On Earth, schools now required students to learn about the wars and the people who fought them. Children grew up knowing the names of heroes like Sandra Bullock, not just wealthy celebrities and politicians. Veterans were invited to speak at graduations and public events. Their stories were told and retold until everyone understood the price of peace. The wealthy classes, embarrassed by how they had acted, began using their money differently. Instead of just buying expensive things to show off, they started funding veteran support programs and military memorials. The same people who had laughed at Sandra now competed to honor soldiers and their families. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans saw themselves. For years after the wars ended, many people had felt ashamed of their military victories. They worried that other species saw them as violent and dangerous. They tried to be more peaceful by forgetting their strength. Sandra's story reminded them that strength used to protect others was not something to be ashamed of. Humans were warriors, yes, but they were warriors who fought for justice and freedom. They were the species that would face impossible odds to save strangers. They were the people who would sacrifice everything and ask for nothing in return. Alien species understood this now in a way they never had before. They had always known humans were good fighters, but they had not understood why humans fought. The reminder showed them that humans did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought because someone had to, and they were willing to pay the price. "The ethereal collective asked me to give you a message," Keanu said, pulling out a small crystal device. "They want you to have this." Sandra took the crystal. It was warm to the touch and seemed to glow with inner light. "What is it?" "A memory. Crystal containing the thoughts and feelings of every ethereal who experienced your story. They want you to know how much your example meant to them. Their entire species has been inspired by what you did." Sandra held the crystal carefully. The ethereals were ancient beings who rarely shared their emotions with other species. For them, to create something like this was almost unheard of. "There's more," Keanu said. "The Void Hunters sent a delegation to human space for the first time in history. They want to learn about our concepts of honor and sacrifice. They think understanding these ideas might help them become better than they were." Even more surprising was news from the Krex Empire. Ambassador Vex had been recalled and replaced with someone who spoke respectfully about human achievements. The new ambassador had requested a meeting with Sandra to formally apologize for his predecessor's behavior. "You started something," Keanu said. "The whole galaxy is talking about what it means to be a hero, not just humans, but everyone. Species that have never cared about honor before are trying to understand it." Sandra walked to her window and looked down at Earth again. Somewhere down there, children were learning about the stars and dreaming of serving among them. Young people were choosing military careers over easy corporate jobs. Veterans were being treated with the respect they deserved. But Sandra also thought about Lisa Grant, the receptionist who had started it all. She had heard that Lisa was working at a small hotel on a mining station now, trying to rebuild her life. Sandra had sent her a message months ago, offering forgiveness and help. But Lisa had never replied. "I hope she finds peace," Sandra said. "Who, Lisa Grant?" Keanu asked. "Yes, she made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve a lifetime of punishment. Everyone should get a chance to learn and grow." That was Sandra Blake in a nutshell, Keanu thought. Even after being humiliated in front of the galaxy, she worried about the person who had hurt her. That kind of compassion was rare anywhere in the universe. "The president wants to make you Secretary of Veteran Affairs," Keanu said. "You could help shape policy for the whole human military." Sandra shook her head. "I'm done with official positions. But I'll keep helping individual people when I can. That's what matters." As they talked, news reports played on screens throughout human space. A new memorial was being dedicated on Mars. A group of veteran officers had started a school for military leadership. The shipyards at Jupiter had named their newest carrier the Sandra Blake. But the most important news was quieter. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 communities, people were choosing service officiousness. They were volunteering to help others. They were joining organizations that protected the weak and defended the innocent. They were becoming the kind of people that Sandra Blake had always been. The incident at Celestial Haven had lasted only a few hours, but its effects would ripple through the galaxy for generations. It had reminded an entire civilization of their better angels. It had shown the universe what humans could be at their best, and at the center of it all was a quiet woman who had never wanted to be famous, who had just tried to do the right thing when no one was watching. Sandra Blake had become more than a hero. She had become a symbol of everything that made humanity worth defending. Years later, when children asked their parents what it meant to be human, the answer often began with a story about a hotel lobby and a woman who showed grace under pressure. It was a story about remembering who you are and what you stand for. Even when the whole world seems to have forgotten. It was the story of Sandra Blake, and it would be told as long as humans traveled. Among the stars,